Because some things that I read in commentaries, which I can attest, do not date to the 1908, but rather they're commentaries of the late 20th century, not the turn of the 20th to the 20th century. A lot of things that he says in here is actually, you start to see it be more put forward in actually people who dedicate their life into studying the Book of Job, contemporary biblical scholars and exegetes. But at his time, there wasn't the approach to the Book of Job that he's putting forward here actually was not commonly taught. Even I would say even in the popular books from the patristic period, his presentation is not something that you find in Gregory the Great's commentary in the Book of Job, which is probably the most famous one that the Catholic Church uses because it's really the only one of the patristic period. A lot of people don't realize that. I always get people who say like, oh yeah, the fathers commented on everything. Well, the Book of Job, only one guy did in the West. Chrysostom did it in the East. But even then, it was quite late. St. Thomas wrote a pretty famous commentary. And his also is not actually, as we would say, is not so... It doesn't harmonize well with what seems to be the apparent reading of the Book of Job. And I'm just so impressed with Chesterton because, if anything, he nails it better than almost every commentary I've ever read. And he does it, and I bet you anything this is analogous to his biography of St. Thomas Aquinas, where he just pretty much read a handful of books one afternoon, and then he dictated it the rest of the day, and then the book was done. And to quote the famous Neo-Thomist Etienne Gilson, founder of PIMS, the Institute of Medieval Study up there in Canada, he said what Chesterton did in one day. Chesterton explained Thomas in one day better than we who have studied Thomas our entire life have been able to do in the whole body of our work. And I would say, I bet you anything, he just perused the Book of Job, and he just had this keen artistic insight into what it meant, and he just put it on paper. To tell you the truth, the conclusion of his introduction, where he actually plays into that a little bit, even though I don't know if it's a form of projection, but he starts talking actually about this artistic sense that you can pick up in this nuance. And I think him primarily as an artist, which a lot of people I don't think a lot of people stress the fact that he's an artist, I think, is what made him such a good deep thinker, because he just had a way of just using intuition, like an artistic intuition, into really peering into things. Whereas people who don't have that artistic intuition get really bogged down in details, they get lost in the forest. Whereas Chesterton kind of viewed everything as an act of love in a certain sense. And anyway, let me get you going now on his introduction. At the very beginning, this is what you call, like I said, is it fortuitous? Is it just like him accidentally stumbling on something? Because again, I doubt he actually studied a lot of the Old Testament. I doubt he read big commentaries on Ecclesiastes, or various other things of the wisdom literature, or even the Book of Job before he wrote this introduction. But the fact that he starts this with this specific point. The Book of Job is among the other Old Testament books both a philosophical riddle and a historical riddle. The reason why I'm picking up on that is the fact that he calls it a riddle is absolutely brilliant. Let me read you a contemporary, like this is not how the translation of the Bible was. The King James Version is what he typically cites in this introduction. But it's really no different than the Douay Rheims in the pertinent spots. This is how the Book of Proverbs, which is probably one of the most famous of the wisdom books, starts off. Here, that men may know wisdom and instruction, understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity, that prudence may be given to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. The wise man also may hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding acquire skill. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. A salient point of Israelite wisdom literature is the fact that it uses riddles in it, actually. They package problems where somebody who thinks they know everything can read the surface and actually not understand the full scope of what is actually being said. It is wisdom literature in Israel actually actively employed riddles to test somebody's wisdom in a certain sense, and also as a pedagogical tool to teach one that there's always more going on than what you're immediately reading. Now, that's at the beginning of the Book of Proverbs. The Book of Proverbs is known as being like, they're just little proverbial little maxims. Like everybody kind of understands these little like truisms handed on throughout the time. But the Book of Proverbs itself says it's trying to teach you how to actually understand words of the wise and their riddles. The fact that he's positing Job as a vehicle for a philosophical riddle is more true than people realize. It's always been my take of the book of Job that one of its most salient points, and this is because of where it, in the old Hebrew way of arranging scriptures, the book of Job actually initiated what we would call actually the wisdom literature. It was Job was always first, and then it was Proverbs. And then later on, you would have Ecclesiastes. That's actually what the Jews did, what's called the Babylonian Talmudic arrangement. The Jews that were up in Babylon, the way that they would organize their Old Testament, Job initiates Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes, and then Song of Songs. And those are all known as wisdom books. And Job is like first and foremost a wisdom book, but it's the most negative of the wisdom books. It actually doesn't teach you anything positively. It teaches you actually to the degree that you don't actually know, which is the beginning of wisdom. Like you can't learn anything unless first you understand that you don't know anything. And that's something that humans, especially in our day and age where we're all technocrats now, we think that since we all have smartphones that we're smart, but we're actually dumber because of the smartphone, because we don't actualize so much of the potential in our brain as far as memory goes and these other things. But we have a false sense of security in our knowledge, and the book of Job is really supposed to shatter that. And the primarily way it does is it's a problem book. It presents a problem, and it's a problem that Chesterton finds the answer to. But most people actually still fumble with, what's the meaning of the book of Job? Chesterton got it. The meaning of the book of Job, as he works through in this introduction, is the fact that you don't know everything, and you should be happy about that. Because if you did know everything, you'd be in a pretty boring world. Because mankind is of a finite intellect. So, philosophical riddle. Did he just choose that to be coy? I don't know. But the fact is, it's a stroke of genius. And I think it's a keen insight. Riddles. The Israelites use riddles. The historical riddle shouldn't be actually overlooked. This is probably one of the more common things that challenge people who read Scripture and have a devout understanding of Scripture. The historical riddle of Job was something that people used in the beginning. It started in the beginning of the 20th century. I think Van Halsem was 1824 to like 1910, I think is when he died. He started what was called the studying actually like where the text of the Bible came from, because pious tradition would put who's the author of the book of Job, and pious tradition would be Job. Same way they did with the Torah. Who's the author of the Torah? Moses. Well, at the turn of the 20th century, people started challenging the authorship of these books by individual people. And there's certain parts of the book of Job that actually, it betrays the fact that it's probably not written by a single hand. Even Jerome, when he translates it, is frustrated because there's like 3 different languages being employed, and he never knows if it's actually Aramaic or Hebrew, and he gets all kind of confused in some parts. He says it's actually like a translator's like worst nightmare, the book of Job. How did Jerome put it? I paid for a Hebrew teacher. Not a small amount of money, by the way. And at the end of it, I think I knew less than what I did before, when it came to translating Job. So he picks up the big things. The beginning of Job is in prose. Then you have just 30-something chapters of poetry, like Hebrew poetry. I think it has the most poetry than any book in the Old Testament. It's the longest Hebrew poem in the entire Old Testament. And then it ends in prose again too, with just little 7 lines. Job ends with a 7-line prose kind of speech. Probably symbolizes his perfection. There's a random young man who shows up in chapter 32 to 36, who's never introduced prior to, and he just like kind of like just shows up, and everyone's like, "Where did this guy come from?" That's Elihu. That's the speech of the young man he mentions in here. And these were all things that actually challenged people, because people had a sort of a very contemporary view of authorship, and I think this is like Chesterton is actually critiquing that here before. It took to the end of the 20th century where this actual mentality actually now has finally started going on the wane in biblical studies. He's like at the very beginning of it becoming a problem, and he already gives you the solution, which is amazing to me. And now contemporary people are actually seeing actually the wholeness of Scripture, even if it is done with many hands. Basically viewing it as a intentional editorship or a collection, and actually being bound under unified sort of art or skill. Again, though, he's way before these solutions have ever been argued in the academic circles. At his time, the academic circles were trying to actually destroy the sacredness of Scripture by saying, "Hey, look at your pious traditions are obviously wrong." Because if you can like prove like all of a sudden Job is not a historical person, and the book itself was probably written over a number of centuries, well then people are like, especially people who kind of think that the Bible fell from the sky, that's how it's divine. They start to think, you mean this thing is like this human production, and it like, and we have no idea who the author is? Like it might be multiple human authors. Well then maybe the book's not inspired. Maybe it's just some accidental collection of words. Kind of like an evolution, the theory of evolution applied to the Scripture, which is exactly how it's being presented. And it was catastrophic to a lot of denominations, especially ones that really didn't have any kind of overarching authority to interpret Scripture, like the Catholic Church did. But things that dealt sola scriptura, or faith churches that had packaged so much into the Bible as like this unchallengeable thing. And what we know about is like unchallengeable. It started being challenged in the 20th century. Anyway, Chesterton has actually kind of already given you a solution to this. And his insight here is key. When you deal with any ancient artistic creation, do not suppose that is anything against it, that it grew gradually. The people who made the old folk poetry did not attach that importance to the actual date and the actual author. That importance, which is entirely the creation of the almost insane individualism of modern times. That's true, and it's actually kind of twofold. One, there's no reason to suppose that the biblical history is written in the style of our history. Like our history actually dates like to Herodotus, which I guess you can call him like the father of Western historiography. And that got picked up in the Roman period, probably most famously by Tacitus. Like the way that the Westerns envision like historical writing is like dates and sequence, and like it's what's important is chronology. It's a gross imposition to then say like that was exactly how history was being recorded a millennia prior to. Like the Israelites are not Westerners. They weren't influenced by Herodotus or Tacitus. We are when we write our history books. And so they wrote with different tools. Culturally, they arranged information differently. And this is another one. We live in a period where like the author of a thing is of utmost importance. Like you only read a book like if you know who the author is. And if it's a well-respected author, hey, you're going to more likely trust that book. If Father Savoie wrote a book, you'd be like, I want to read that book. You know? Pick somebody else, just so you know, if I do write a book, I'm using a pseudonym. I'm not gonna put my name on it because I don't want to get fired. But it's important for us to understand. When I read this line, I immediately thought, because of my background, I thought of architecture. Like most of the architects from the medieval period, we don't even know who they are. And some of the cathedrals of the medieval period took such a length of time that we know multiple architects actually worked on it. So whose building is it? It's an interesting kind of point. Like the architect of Chartres, which is probably one of the most influential Gothic cathedrals in France, nobody knows who he is. Nobody knew who that architect was. It wasn't until the Renaissance that paintings started having signatures. Now think about that. End of the 15th century, I think Giotto was one of the first ones that started signing his work. And actually, the way it started wasn't necessarily so everybody would know this is a Giotto. It was actually Giotto's workshop, so that like Giotto saying like, don't touch this one. This one's done. I'm putting my seal on it. Like we don't have to work on this one anymore. That's how signatures actually started being employed on art. We can't even imagine art nowadays not having the guy's signature on it. Because we view art as the expression of that individual, that person, and so we want to know who that person is. What he's getting at here is in antiquity, or what's he called, folk poetry. It wasn't so much about an individual. It was trying to relate a story to an entire group. It was actually not somebody's individual story. Rather, it was a story of a people. And so, just like a medieval cathedral, it wasn't a building for an architect. It was a building for a community. It was the community's house. And different members of the community worked on that house. And some of them designed different parts of that house. And they all shared the same sort of vision of what that house is supposed to do, which is give honor and worship to God. And so he actually deals with this. He deals with this historical riddle as like a non-issue. He basically says like we're being anachronistic by trying to use contemporary standards or contemporary sensibilities and impose it back on Job. And he's absolutely true. Like it doesn't make any big difference if multiple hands touch Job because it was definitely done with the same spirit. That's absolutely a valid point, and I would say it's a much bigger point than just the book of Job, because there's lots of books in the Old Testament that have sort of historical problems to it. Esther is one, Tobit is one, Jeremiah is one, Isaiah is one, way more than people would ever feel comfortable knowing. When you see variances in manuscripts and actually trying to, they start thinking like, okay, this is a different hand must have touched it right here, like. But under Chesterton's ideas, like this isn't really that big of a deal, like, because he has that artistic insight. He's like, these people, it's not about one person's product. It's about actually a product of a people. And how does he put it? The creation of the tribal epic was to some extent regarded as a tribal work, like the building of the tribal temple. When I read that, I was like, see, look, I was right by having architecture in my head, because he ends up using it there too. Just so you know, I was primarily, before I was priest, I was also an artist. That's maybe why I have a resonance with your Chesterton. So he hates his individualistic way of reading this, and we should too. I would say, absolutely. How does he gives actually an important point too, reflecting on actually a work of a people. Remember, this is the last line that I have on my first page. Remember that this old world, which made these old poems, like the Iliad and Job, always kept the tradition of what it was making. That's an interesting thing, because right here he's kind of revealing actually the process by which multiple people can work on the same thing. The tradition, the thing that's being handed on, really actually the point of the work, the vision of the work. What the work is supposed to teach, that teaching is what's being handed on, which is why different hands can actually contribute in order to bring that about completely. Even if they do it by composing different parts of it, because the different parts that have been presented in the book of Job, where's my book of Job? Like, what are some of the different parts, the different hands that are touching it? One is the one is the poem of wisdom, which I think is in chapter 27. I think it's 27, or is the poem of wisdom. Like the whole poem, and it's about how you can't find wisdom anywhere. You can't find it anywhere. It's not going to be in creation anywhere. It has to, like, it comes from God. That's perfectly in line with what the rest of the book is actually about, even though it seems to be by a different hand. Elihu, who seems to be by a different hand, he's somebody actually who's rebuking everybody, while at the same time also showing that he himself doesn't have wisdom because he's a little bit too arrogant, which is the whole point, which is that man needs not be arrogant, which is why when the Yahweh shows up at the end, he ends up silencing everybody in a certain sense. So that's just my way of actually showing you a little bit how even if different hands touched it, they're actually all reinforcing the same point of the story, which is it's a riddle book. And the riddle that it's trying to teach you is actually some things are it's like tic-tac-toe. Like the only way you can win is by not playing. Well, like the book of Job is the only way you can understand is by giving up trying to understand everything. There you go. You write that one. That's my one-word like description of the book of Job. This is a profound one that gave me pause and sent it to me highlighted, and I was very happy with that because I highlighted it too. It's the last line of that third paragraph. Let us remember that there was more unity in those times in 100 men than there is unity now in one man. Then a city was like one man. Now one man is like a city in civil war. This is a sort of a Chesterton paradox. He says something that's opposite, but he's also revealing something absolutely profound, which is that one man can be completely at civil war. How does that happen? That happens when man has contradictory ideas within his own head. He's at conflict within himself. Cognitive dissonance, constantly grappling with actually what he's supposed to do in the here and now. And he becomes more and more unstable, more restless if he doesn't have a very good idea of how he relates to the world and how he relates to God. I mean, this is one of the things that religion is supposed to heal in man. Religion is supposed to properly orient man in relation to other men and also in relation to God. And that's exactly actually how we get unified. And that's what I think is really profound, which is that people who are unified by a similar belief structure are more unified than somebody's own body unifies them if they don't know what they believe. Like, think about that for a second. If somebody doesn't know what they believe, they're unified as one person, yet they have such a serious, like, they're constantly in flux and changing. They're chaos in their head. But a bunch of people who aren't unified, because they all have distinct bodies, they're all individuals, they actually form more of a unity when they all have the same creed. They believe on the most important things. That made me think of actually St. Paul's first letter, Corinthians chapter 12, where he talks about, though we are many parts, we are all one body. Like, this is absolutely like what Christianity is supposed to do. Is like we are one faith, one Christ, one baptism. Yeah. And we're unified not by our physical body. We're unified actually by our faith, which is our understanding of actually our relationship to each other and to God. It's a profound insight there. And so if people are that unified by a common set of ideas, then yeah, they can actually author a more unified work together than one man who has no idea what he's talking about or what he believes and he's constantly in flux. You could end up with a book like Ulysses by James Joyce. So I think that's something to meditate on. I'm going to go back to that one. Now he gets into he now applies this unity to the entirety of the Old Testament. I like that because he's only writing an introduction to Job, but he's like, hey, if you want to know how Job is special, you got to actually know how it's like everything in the Old Testament and also how it's unique in all of the Old Testament. Because he applies his first principle, like I just did too, explain to you that It's like this for the entirety of the Old Testament. The Old Testament, nobody doubts, is composed by multiple people. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Moses, Joshua, Ruth. Like, you have all these books, all these authors, and they're all together. Like, I love that. That's what you call, like, he's thinking absolutely consistently. He goes, I don't care if multiple hands touch one book. That doesn't mean that one book can't have one message. He goes, and moreover, like, that one book is within a bunch of books that in itself is a one collection, what we call the Old Testament. And you're going to tell me that all those things together don't have one message? Because it's been handed on. So if I don't have an issue with the fact that you can have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel next to each other, given one unified message, albeit from 4 different authors, he goes, there's really no issue with the Book of Job having multiple authors. It's absolutely, that's a brilliant actual, like, if you want to know how to convince somebody of something, you first present them something that they already believe, and then show, like, I'm just applying what you already believe here to this. Why is it such a big problem? Perfect. Perfect. Well, when he gets through, this is him also having a sort of artistry. Most people would not say the same theme of the Old Testament is going to be described the way that he does. Most people would say, depending on what their creed is, or depending on where they're coming from. If they're a Christian, they're going to say the purpose of the Old Testament is to reveal Christ. Agree with that. But if you could read the Old Testament without the New Testament, what he presents here is absolutely something to really ponder. How does he say it? The main idea, this is the last line of that paragraph, he goes, the main idea, they do not understand its main idea, the Old Testament, which is the idea of all men being merely the instruments of a higher power. That for us seems to be like, that strikes us hard because we read it with New Testament eyes, and we go like, wait a minute, I call God Abba, I call him Father, and Christ told me, hey, I call you friends. Like, that's huge. Like, but if you just read from the Old Testament, the amount of love God has for his people is manifest, but what's also manifest is the idea that he's in charge of actually history, and he definitely punishes, and he constantly is punishing those who are failing in what they're supposed to be doing. That's absolutely like the main thread, actually, of the Old Testament, is the fact that, like, God is the author of the story, and he keeps actually intervening in this story in various different ways, and people left to their own devices are incapable of actually bringing about heaven on earth. Man is always chasing Eden in a certain sense and always messing it up, and God's constantly intervening along the way and constantly proving to men that they can't do it on their own, actually, that they need a Savior. That's how it points towards the New Testament. So unless you first understand the fact that men are merely instruments of a higher power, you'll fall into a false humanism where you end up thinking that, oh yeah, without God, man can do perfectly fine. That's why reading the Old Testament is actually quite important, because it's supposed to humble you in actually the view of man. Here we go. Then he uses the Christian one in the next paragraph. He goes, hey, because everybody forgets this idea. Now, this is true with Christians. If you've ever heard me give a homily where I critique and complain about saint biographies, which are written by fans, if you will, they always like suck out all the humanity from the life of the person's life in a certain sense. You end up with like this stained glass window or a statue figure who's like doesn't even feel like he's like human anymore. This like. A saint is somebody who doesn't do anything wrong. Like, I don't know. I don't know. That's not one of the criteria of actual sanctity in a certain sense, because they're still human. Even if they don't do anything like gravely wrong, they still are full of imperfection and ignorance. That's what it means to be man, is to not know anything and to like be stupid every once in a while. I mean, that's what we do, isn't it? That's what I do. You guys. I mean, I got suckered into giving a talk on Job at 10:30 at night, just so you know. Like, I'm okay, so for instance, those, for instance, who complain of the atrocities and the treacheries of the judges and the prophets of Israel have really got a notion in their head that has nothing to do with the subject. They are too Christian. I love this. This is funny. Like, because if you read the Judges, you're like, oh my goodness, did he really kill all those people? Like, what's going on here? This is like, there's all this war and bloodshed and adultery, and it's like, let me keep going. They are reading back into the pre-Christian scriptures a purely Christian idea, the idea of saints, the idea that the chief instruments of God are very particularly good men. This is a deeper, a more daring, a more interesting idea than the old Jewish one. It is an idea that innocence has about it something terrible, which in the long run makes and remakes empires in the world. But the Old Testament idea was much more what may be called the common sense idea. That strength is strength, that cunning is cunning, that worldly success is worldly success. And that Jehovah, just so you know, he uses Jehovah in here, and I don't know when it actually got fixed, but Jehovah is a mispronunciation. The thing is that the Hebrews in the Bible never actually, you don't know what the vowels for the divine name is. And so they would put the vowels for Elohim within the Tetragrammaton, which is YWHW or something like that. If I wanted to transliterate into Roman letters. And so anyway, early on, I forget who it was that came up with trying to actually spell out the name of the Tetragrammaton. Jerome never does it. Because Jerome knows actually, like, that's the divine name, and you're supposed to say Elohim. So in like the Dewey Reams, you would never see the divine name. You would just see Lord, capitalized. Anyway, Jehovah is supposed to be Yahweh. But they thought that they knew what the letters were, and they ended up messing it up. So anyway, that was contemporary at his time. Everyone's still calling it Jehovah. So it's kind of cool because you're not supposed to ever say the word Yahweh, but that's the divine name. Anyway, it's an accent. Jews don't know who Jehovah is. It's something they would never pronounce it. They would just say Elohim, the Lord. Okay, so where's he going with this? Okay, now I thought immediately of St. Augustine, since he's talking about this is a really Christian idea to think that only good people like do things. Because St. Augustine in Intro to Christian Doctrine made a big point into saying actually if somebody righteous is doing something in the Old Testament that looks like a sin, well maybe you're like misunderstanding it. And this caused like one of the big ones that is kind of problematic is when you get to people like Jacob, who obviously does deception in order to trick his brother, in order to steal from his brother the birthright by literally like lying to his dad, and he does it 3 times. Like the biblical irony of the story is really kind of manifest. But hey, Jacob must be a righteous guy because from him, come the Israelite people. He is the vehicle of promise. But that's actually part of the thing. Like he's also named Israel, which literally means he who wrestles with God. Like remember that, because like that's who we are too. We're he who wrestles with God. But before I throw Augustine completely under the bus, 2 chapters later, after he gives us, he's writing to people like, look, so you don't confuse yourself. And it's funny because he basically says, if you're disordered, you're going to look to validate your disorder in somebody else. Like you're like, hey, well, look, Jacob did it, so it must be good, okay? So I could do it. And he basically says he's basically trying to actually vaccinate. Sorry to use like a charged word nowadays. He's trying to vaccinate you from certain errors, especially somebody who is just being introduced to the scripture. He's trying to protect you from like gross errors. But then he says this a couple chapters later. This is St. Augustine now. And when he reads of the sins of great men, see, Augustine knows great men, saints that committed sins at some points in life. The most famous is David. Although he may be able to see and to trace out in them a figure of things to come, Let him yet put the literal fact to this use also, to teach him not to dare to vaunt himself in his own good deeds, and in comparison with his own righteousness, to despise others as sinners, when he sees in the case of men so eminent both the storms that are to be avoided and the shipwrecks that are to be wept over. For the sins of these men were recorded to this end, that men might everywhere and always tremble at that saying of the apostle. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest he fall. For there is hardly a page of Scripture on which it is not clearly written that God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. Beautiful words by the great saint. And I would like to say, St. Augustine also makes the point of looking at 2 Timothy, I forget the citation, but it's in 2 Timothy where, famous quote, all Scripture inspired of God is profitable to teach, to reprove, to correct, to instruct in justice. But nowhere does it say to imitate. People always mess that one up. Like, you're not supposed to imitate everything in the Bible. The Bible's trying to instruct you in something, especially the Old Testament. And what Chesterton also is really kind of hitting on, and this is salient, this is actually what makes the Old Testament very special. Israel is one of the only, as far as I know actually, it is the only codified book of religion that has the entire history of a people where they seem to be almost obsessed at recording absolutely every failure they ever experienced. Think of that. Think of writing your family history. Yeah, exactly. Would you like be trying like, okay, yeah, I did that in high school, and we put that there, and then like, oh yeah, then I went from that mistake to this mistake. Like, who does that? And this is like an entire nation. Like, that's their tradition that they handed on, actually, which is how unsaintly they were, like how unfaithful they were. It's absolutely unbelievable when you really think about it. Imagine actually, like, if the church, we should actually do this, because I've read some good church, histories, and it's always like the glories of the church. Like, we invented the university system, and Mendel was actually a monk. We invented, all these, and we did it. Hey, of course, we had all these great things. And you know what? Israel actually did preserve monotheism and handed it on. Amazing. But imagine if we wrote our own book where we talked about actually just all the times we failed to live up to actually our teaching. That's what the Old Testament is. This is absolutely amazing. And he knows, and just that's a good segue. Chesterton goes, I cannot comprehend how it is that so many simple-minded skeptics, I love it when he actually uses incendiary name-calling. Like, it validates my use too. Like, I do that too when I teach classes. Have read such stories as the fraud of Jacob. That's Genesis 27. That's what I was just referring to. And suppose that the man who wrote it, whoever he was, see, look at, he won't even say Moses, huh? It's the Torah, all right? Moses wrote all 5 books. He doesn't say that. Whoever he was, because to him it's not that important. Did not know that Jacob was a sneak, just as well as we do. Like, yeah, like, because modern skeptics would be like, look it, you're like, this guy, like, this is like the person who found you, like, and look at, he's a fraud, he's doing these things, like, this is some kind of folk story of the trickster who has to get tricked. And Chesterton's response is like, do you think that the person who wrote it didn't understand what he was writing? Like, of course he knew that's the point of it, actually. The primeval human sense of honor does not change so much as that, but the simple-minded skeptics are, like the majority of modern skeptics, Christians, I like that. He goes, the people who have problems with great characters, very important characters who actually have moral failings, is that, like, according to the biblical idea, like, it's not a surprise when man fails. If you're looking for actually just a bunch of people who never fail, he calls them actually, like, you're trying to be Christians. You're trying to actually write your own hagiography, the way that Christians do with their saints. They, like, take out all the humanness in their story, and they just give you, like, the heroic virtue in their stories. Not all biographers, do that, but, like, The vast majority of them do, especially French Romantic period, which are just, they're terrible to read. Don't do it. The French. Okay. The central idea of the great part of the Old Testament may be called the idea of the loneliness of God. God is not the only chief character. God is not the only chief character of the Old Testament. God is properly the only character of the Old Testament. That's an interesting way of actually putting it. Because all the other characters come and go pretty quick, if you think about it. They're very transitory. Man, Abel only has like 3 lines. He's like literally gone. And then Cain's gone 7 lines later. Like, are they all characters? They are, but actually they all form one big grand narrative for the one character, which is God. Like, they all form, like, human history is actually God's story, the way he's governing. God is central to all these other characters, all these different humans, these tools. Some that excel in certain things. Abraham is faith. David his courage. But all of them also has weak points too. Like, God is actually like the salient character of the Old Testament. Then he ties it up. This actually goes back to how we introduced this whole idea a couple pages back. He goes, all the patriarchs and prophets are merely his tools or weapons. It's true. It's only by God that they do all these things. For the Lord is a man of war. He uses Joshua like an axe or Moses like a measuring rod. For him, Samson is only a sword and Isaiah a trumpet. The saints of Christianity are supposed to be like God, to be, as it were, little statuettes of him. I like that. Of course, Christianity, though, is like, actually, we can become God. Like, that's the whole point of the incarnation. But not in the Old Testament. The Old Testament hero is no more supposed to be of the same nature as God than a saw or a hammer is supposed to be of the same shape as the carpenter. That's kind of a good way of actually seeing it. Like, all men in the Old Testament are mere instruments. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't actually change per se in the New Testament. Like, God doesn't need us in order to bring him joy or happiness. Like, God perfectly loves himself, and he just wants to share that with us. He actually elevates us to him, and we kind of forget that. Like, we, in a certain sense, we're parts. We're not the body. We're parts of his body. What people of faith are. But it's more apparent in the Old Testament, this idea, like, all these people are actually performing certain functions and how God wants to actually transmit tradition till the advent of his Son. So that's actually the general tenor of the Old Testament. Nevertheless, the main characteristic remains, the sense not merely that God is stronger than man, not merely that God is more secret than man, but that he means more, that he knows better what he is doing, that compared with him we have something of the vagueness, the unreason, and the vagrancy of the beasts that perish. And then he quotes scripture. It is he that sitteth above the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers. I like that. It's like this metaphor actually showing how small man is, grasshopper. But he just talked about actually how, like, compared to him, like, man seems to be almost like a beast that perishes. He goes the way of all of creation in a certain sense. We know the soul persists, but according to the eyes, what is man? That's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. I actually ponder this, like, because Chesterton's not citing stuff, he's just pulling stuff that's in his head. And when I think of Isaiah chapter 40, and it would be no different probably for the Anglican church at this time, but Isaiah 40 is really it's a Christmas reading. It's Matins on actually the Christmas, on the vigil, the day before. And that's the one that starts with, be comforted, my people, for you have paid twice. You've received twice the punishment. Like, and God's now going to come, like, and take care of you and deliver you. And it likens actually man to, like, the flower of the field, which is it's a very common Old Testament metaphor. The transitoriness of man, like, man needs God. Anyway, Chesterton's pulling this out right there, and it has that context that man needs, like, the incarnation was absolutely imperative because man could not be God Man could not be God. The book is so intent upon asserting the personality of God that it almost asserts the impersonality of man. Yeah, man is this really transitory thing. He's very inconsistent. Uh, it relates to stories in just in little snippets. It's true. Unless this gigantic cosmic brain has conceived a thing, that thing is insecure and void. Man has not enough tenacity to ensure its continuance. And that's the thing, like, each subsequent age comes and goes and fails and fails and fails. And it's only the only consistent character is actually God, bringing his people back, sending them into exile, raising up a judge, land rest for 40 years, raising up another judge. Who is the old judge? I don't know. We already forgot, and we're already like going after like the pagans again. Like that's the Old Testament. This is like the one salient, consistent thing is that actually God's managing it all somehow. Then he ends with Psalm 126. Except the Lord build a house, their labor is but lost that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman watcheth but in vain. The vanity of man, the transitoriness of man. Man can't actually do anything. He's a tool. And the tool is useless unless somebody's hand is moving it, right? And God's the hand that moves all these tools in the Old Testament. Just so you know, that's Vespers on Tuesday. I did this psalm tonight when I said Vespers. Everywhere else, then, the Old Testament positively rejoices. Okay, that's a strong one. This is like, I think this is a paradox too, okay? So don't freak out when you see this. Positively rejoices in the obliteration of man. Like, oh my goodness, I thought God loved me. Now he wants to be like rejoicing in the obliteration of man. In comparison with the divine purpose. And that's the thing, God's purpose is bigger than any lifespan in the Old Testament. Absolutely, that's true. Adam died long, long, long ago. Eve died long ago. Everybody died. Divine purpose didn't die with them. That is actually something to be happy about. The book of Job stands definitively alone, and this is it. This is, okay, Job fits into this narrative, and to tell you the truth, the biggest speaking part that God has in the entirety of the Old Testament is in the book of Job. It's the longest monologue, as far as I know, it's the only monologue of God in the entire Old Testament. I mean, in some of the prophets it says, thus says the Lord, you know, but then it will package like a prophetic oracle, if you will. But the book of Job proposes to put forward a divine speech. That goes over like almost 2 chapters. It's the longest one in the entire Old Testament. So if you want to know when God definitively speaks in the Old Testament, you look in the book of Job. And you're not going to be, well, you'll be amazed at what you learn. But the book of Job stands definitively alone because in the book of Job, Job definitively asks, but what is the purpose of God? This is not a line from the book of Job. This is Chesterton's summation. Is it worth the sacrifice even of our miserable humanity? Of course it's easy enough to wipe out our own paltry wills for the sake of a will that is grander and kinder. But is it grander and kinder? Let God use his tools. Let God break his tools. But what is he doing? And what are they being broken for? Question mark. It is because of this question that we have to attack as a philosophical riddle, the riddle of the book of Job. And now he's going to usher into his philosophical riddle of the book of Job. This paragraph right here I just read, a lot of people propose that, contrary to what I already told you, a lot of people would propose that the meaning of the book of Job, and this was a Jewish philosopher named Leibniz actually coined this one, is what's called theodicy, like God on trial, okay? And for the salient purpose of whether or not it is just for the innocent to suffer in a certain sense. And that's the supposed problem of the book of Job is actually, and it's packaged that way in its prologue, which is there's this righteous man named Job, okay, and then the devil says, well, like he only likes you, God, because he has a good life, and God allows the devil to actually like take away everything, and it's almost like the test is whether or not Job's faith is going to, in a certain sense, persist in God in spite of suffering great hardship. When you get into the monologues, though, that's not actually what seems to be the case. When you get into the big monologues that are all poetry, the salient point is everybody trying to figure out what Job did in order to suffer so much, whether it's a result of his sin or his kids' sins, or Job maintains his innocence, and he maintains like that he doesn't know why he's having to suffer, and he's not silently complaining, so it makes you want to redefine what patience means. As James says, you have heard of the patience of Job. Well, Job talks a lot, so patience isn't like silently suffering, if anything. And that's why, I tell people all the time, I'm a very patient man, and then they go like, oh yeah. All you do is like complain and stuff. I was like, I know, but I do it with a smile. They don't normally buy that, but okay, anyway. The philosophical riddle. So let's get into the fact that he packages philosophical, that's huge. And by the way, he posits this here, and you're going to notice that he doesn't actually pick up this whole idea of like, he doesn't touch the issue of innocent suffering. And I think that's actually also his insight, because that's not actually the main thrust of the Book of Job. As I said, the main thrust of the Book of Job is, like, the whole why do the innocent suffer? That is not answered. God never says why. Never says why. Read the entire thing. You're not going to get that. What I think you're going to get negatively is that, well, I don't know. There must be some reason, because God doesn't do anything without reason, but it's not for me to know. I don't know. It's a hidden reason.
We just lost I don't know, the light on the, does it overheat sometimes on the projector?
Oh, I don't know. I might have fallen asleep.
The projector falls asleep? Here, I'll shut it on.
Somebody turn on the lights in there.
We can hear it just fine. Can you see
I
us?
see you now. I see you.
I got Tom on it.
Way to go, Tom.
Oh, yeah, it's restarting now.
It doesn't take long. I'm just going to keep going while it comes up. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me or what?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, it's just light. It's good. Keep going, keep going.
Silence! Okay, philosophy is important. The philosophical riddle. As soon as you see the word philosophy, that's a word that's completely been adulterated and messed up nowadays. He uses it correctly, and it's absolutely amazing because he's not actually a philosopher. He's not trained as philosophy. But to use my favorite philosopher, Joseph Pieper, philosophy is the summation of all of creation. Like, it's actually trying to find the why, or the what for, of the entirety of creation. It's not just like some small part. The nature of the true philosopher is actually to try to understand everything, not just a part. It's not just he's a moral philosopher. Like no. There's no point of philosophy. Philosophy ponders the totality of creation, which is why philosophy always has to terminate in theology, because God is part of existence too. Like, he is existence, and philosophy really seeks to ponder everything that is, literally, and that's exactly kind of actually that's the worldview of the Book of Job. It's actually a totality, which is why I like the fact that he uses a philosophical riddle. I don't know if he realizes that or not, but the nature of philosophy is actually to ponder all that is, and God definitely is. We can't know who he is as far as a personal God. That requires revelation, but God is definitely a proper object of philosophy. Now, he's going to actually, taking what I just said about the nature of philosophy, pondering like reality, all the totality of reality. Philosophy is either eternal or it is not philosophy. Like, he's like quoting Pieper, man. He's like, this guy, he's not even a trained philosopher. And he knows more about philosophy than most modern philosophers who just think like philosophy is epistemology, or like how man thinks, or what the nature of truth. Like, no, philosophy is eternal. It's everything, the totality of creation. But I shouldn't say creation, the totality of the existing order. And God is fundamental to that. He is existence. The modern habit of saying, I love this is my opinion, but I may be wrong, is entirely irrational. Like, I like that. Okay, like, in a certain sense, when we give an opinion, and the majority of the things that we think we know is an opinion, the nature of an opinion is that it's reformable. Like, I'm willing to change it if you give me different data. Unless you're Dr. Fauci, then you never change your opinion. You just hold it like a dog in his bone. Like, I'm never changing. Actually, I'll change it by intensification, okay? Like, wear 3 masks now, or 4. But I'll never tell you to take it off. I'll never tell you to take it off. Okay. This is my opinion, but I may be wrong. It's entirely irrational. Now, the reason why he's saying that is like the way that a lot of our contemporaries will say it is like, you have your truth, I have my truth. This is my opinion. I may be wrong, but the thing is that if you're using it to live your life, if your opinion, which you may be wrong, is also the underpinning for how you're actually doing your conduct, like you're believing that it's true, like, or else you wouldn't be forming your behavior otherwise. That's why he says it's irrational. Like nobody purposely does things. Like, if I didn't think Christianity was right, I wouldn't try constantly. I might fall short of its teachings because of difficulty or something, but I would never attempt to try to actually live the life of a Christian or try to persist in it. Like, you can't do something like with conviction while at the same time thinking, I may be wrong about this. Like, it's irrational. If I say that it may be wrong, I say that is not my opinion. If I say that it may be wrong, I say that is not my opinion, because everybody wants their opinion to be correct. That's true. Nobody wants to just go to a wrong opinion. The modern habit of saying, every man has a different philosophy. This is my philosophy, and it suits me. The habit of saying this is mere weak-mindedness, and that's true, because such a person actually doesn't understand what philosophy is. Philosophy is actually the truth of the totality of the existing order. And you know what? We're all part of the existing order. So there's one true interpretation of that. Absolutely. So you can't have multiple existing orders that don't agree with each other. We might not understand all aspects of the created order, but to posit fundamentally that we can all have a different philosophy is to not actually understand what philosophy is. That's to say that we all are actually inhabiting different worlds right now, which I guess some physicists actually think we are. It just shows you how crazy they've gone. A cosmic philosophy is not constructed to fit a man. A cosmic philosophy is constructed to fit a cosmos. A man can no more possess a private... See, he's gone up there. We knew he was going to go to religion. A man can no more possess a private religion than he can possess a private sun and moon, because he's properly putting religion is actually a byproduct of the sum total of reality. Like God, creation, how creation relates to God, and how man in that creation relates to each other. By consequence, there is some kind of actual religion. Literally, the subjection of yourself to that order of creation. You obeying your place of it. Like, religion is absolutely going to be a byproduct of the created order. And by consequence, it too is literally, by definition, a cosmic religion. It's a worldwide religion, and you can't have competing ones, just like you can't have competing philosophies. That's like saying you have multiple gods. Okay, the Indians have their god and their religion, that's fine. And, Luther has his god, and that's fine. No, there's one God. There's one totality of creation. And there's one proper religion too. It's not private. It's not a private affair. The first of the intellectual beauties of the book of Job is that it is all concerned with this desire to know the actuality, the existence of things, the desire to know what is, not merely what seems. And this is absolutely true. They're trying to actually understand what is actually the case. It's a beautiful actual insight. They're all trying to actually know, actually, the totality. They want actually the divine knowledge of actually, why is this going on? Why am I suffering? It's not because I did something wrong. How do I stop it? I don't know. I'm going to kind of skip the next section just because it's something that he goes over in lots of places where he hates the pessimist and he hates the optimist, or at least the popular uses of those two names. This was written contemporaneously with Orthodoxy, 1908, which, tell you the truth, no, never mind, that's the next page. And actually in Orthodoxy, he deals with the pessimist and the optimist again. But I will, I guess, shortly just say that he thinks the idea of the pessimist being somebody who's just depressed or going towards nihilism, which in a certain sense, Job starts his whole discourse with actually wishing he was dead. So it kind of gives that kind of impression. But he makes this a beautiful kind of thing, actually. But Job actually, he would love to be happy. That's part of him, actually. How does he put it? He is a perplexed optimist. He is an exasperated optimist. He is an outraged and insulted optimist. Those are all true. He wishes the universe to justify himself, not because he wishes it to be caught out. Yeah, that's right. I knew this was a terrible place to be living in. That's not what Job wants. But because he really wishes it to be justified, he wants to know, yes, absolutely, there's a point to all this. He's optimistic in the sense that he thinks there is a point, which is why one of the most important aspects of the book of Job is the fact that even though Job is suffering all this absolute turmoil, he never stops talking to God. In spite of the fact that God never actually responds to him until the very end. That's something that everybody always misses. Absolutely. It's kind of and the same thing happens in the prophets. Jeremiah is complaining all the time. All the time he's complaining. But the thing is, there's always another chapter where he still goes out and does what God tells him to do. And it's just wow, this guy complains all the time. He's like Father Savoie. And you know what? He gets up and he does what he's supposed to do anyway. He just nails it. In the mode of Jeremiah. Okay. So this is this paradox. You would think that Job is the pessimist because he's the complainer, but in truth, he's actually the optimist. That's a keen insight. He does believe there's a point to it all. And ironically, he equates what you would think are the optimists, the three friends. They're not really friendly. They don't do a good job of sympathizing with Job. They would have if they just stopped talking and just commiserated with them. But instead they want to actually try to convince him that everything is okay. And Job's obviously not everything is okay. Okay, my entire life is turmoil right now, and I don't even have friends now because you're yelling at me. That's the book of Job. Everything's been taken away. Even my friends have been taken away because they're here telling me that I obviously did something wrong. And so the friends who, when they're viewing all this absolute turmoil, they're in a certain sense are reinterpreting the turmoil as something good. That is what Chesterton says. They're the pessimists. And I actually like that because they're denying actually the hardship that's going on, or they're reinterpreting it as this positive thing, which is not actually what Christians do. I think that might be also lost a little bit. We always say that God can bring good out of it, but we never say that the evil thing is good. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people tend to think oh yeah, this is my cross, I'm going to embrace it. I was well, why don't you nail yourself to it? Why don't we just let me go invent crosses for you to nail yourself to? If these are all good things, let's just try to put as much misery as I can on your back. If you think that's going to make you a good person. That's not actually how we live life. very often, like, life itself gives us crosses that we have to live with. Sometimes they're like from the past, from our own willful decisions. Sometimes they're not at all. Tragedy can hit. So just, I mean, it's an absolute fluke that I'm alive in the year 2020, just like all of you, and we are living through societal insanity. Okay, like, was that a result of our sin? Like, I don't know. I'm not taking that one. Okay, like, somebody else can take it, but I'm not going to take that one. And I'm not going to say it's good. Absolutely not. I know God can bring something good out of it, but that's a different thing. That's the person. That's what I think. Chesterton right here, I think, kind of what he does is he basically, this is a beautiful paradox. I'm going to use it actually after this. He equates Pollyannism as actually a true pessimist. Think of that. The person who looks around and sees that everything's actually good, he says that person's absolutely a pessimist, because obviously not everything's good around here. This person is like, he's so pessimistic that he thinks all this bad stuff is actually good. Like, oh my goodness, that's a creepy view of the world. That's what I think of now when I find that salesman who's always smiling at me. He's like, "Isn't this great?" I was like, "No, it's not great right now. You better rethink that." Okay, so now we get into the insights of the book. Now, yeah, okay. So the pessimist and optimist, that's actually like the three cycles of Job arguing with his friends, because that's what it is. It's one big argumentation. And all the friends, like Job talks, and then Eliphaz talks, and Job talks, and Bildad talks, and then Job talks, and Zophar talks, and it does that like 3 times. Except the last one. The last one gets cut short. Zophar doesn't talk at the very, very end because he has probably nothing else to say. Or because Job actually just takes a speech from him. That's my interpretation. Because they all kind of just say the same thing, and they're arguing in a circle, it seems like. And if in that whirlwind of humanity trying to actually educate Job in a certain sense, and not being able to effectively do it, out of that whirlwind of argumentation, God is going to then speak, literally out of a whirlwind. And this is actually how Chesterton goes into his next paragraph. When at the end of the poem, God enters somewhat abruptly, and he does, it's absolutely abruptly. You're like, whoa, where'd this come from? Is struck the sudden and splendid note which makes the thing as great as it is. And this is like, oh, it's so true. All the human beings through the story, and Job especially, have been asking questions of God, and to each other, I should say. Just for an example, okay, Job, I went through, now these are rough, okay, because the only way I could do this was by counting question marks. I didn't have time to go into like the Hebrew and look at for all the interrogatives and stuff like that. But I saw just question marks go, okay? So these are rough estimates for questions. Job asks in this book 113 questions.
Wow.
The friends, all combined, half that number at 56. And then Elihu by himself is half of the friends roughly at 25. Okay? That's a lot of questions. Riddle book, everyone's asking questions. There's not a whole lot of answers, but everyone's asking questions. 113, 56, 25. You can add that up and tell me what it is. A more trivial poet would have had God enter in some sense or another in order to answer those questions. Yes, what is the problem with pain, the problem of evil? Tell me. I've been asking you 113 times. But a touch truly to be called inspired, when God enters, it is to ask a number more questions on his own account. God asks 61 questions in his monologue. Doesn't answer a single one proposed to him throughout the entirety of the book. Instead, when he shows up, he goes, okay, fine. Let me give you some questions. And he asks 61 of them. They're all rhetorical, and they all have embodied in them a negative answer. No, 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 no. Were you there when I hung when I set the bounds for the ocean? No, no. And like man has to just like rhetorically has to answer in his head like, no, I wasn't there. I wasn't there for that one. I wasn't there for that one. I wasn't there for that one. Like it's kind of like beats them all like, yeah, no, no, no. Like I have no idea what the heck's going on. I don't even know the world I live in right now. Like that's actually how it's supposed to be actually framed on you. Now, again, how does the skepticism of God? Now I think that's kind of a harsh term that he says. The skepticism of God himself takes up the role of skeptic. This idea of like he who is questioned then becomes the questioner. He does what all the great voices defending religion have always done. Now this is a profound insight. He does, for instance, what Socrates did. And if everybody knows, the Socrates always knew, but what's very often Socrates in his pursuit of knowledge, when he would find somebody, he would always find somebody who thought they had the answer to the question, like Euphophro, like, what is justice? Oh, I know what justice is, Socrates. And then the Socratic Dialogue is Socrates asking Euphophro a bunch of questions, which reveals actually that Euphophro doesn't actually know what he's talking about. Like all the Socratic Dialogues do that. Like by asking a question, Socrates reveals that he who thought he had answers actually doesn't. At its heart, what it's trying to do is actually get that person who thought too firmly of what he believed to actually question himself, so he can actually get a better idea in. And actually, this is the mode that actually God Himself does in this. Actually, He questions Job, and Job, since he's a righteous man, he learns his lesson in a certain sense. But he turns rationalism against itself. If you wanted side reading, I would read the chapter called "The Maniac" in Orthodoxy, written in the same year. This is actually the thing. The idea that man actually being too sure of his own knowledge and having too much of a claim of his understanding of the way of things. Like a salient point of actual true knowledge is knowing actually the limitation of your own knowledge. And that is actually another salient point of Socrates. Socrates actually says, he went to the Delphic Oracle and he asked, because he wanted to find a proper teacher that could teach him things. So he went to the Delphic Oracle and Socrates goes, who is the wisest man in all of Athens? And the Delphic Oracle goes, well, you are Socrates. He's like, how can that be? Like, I'm always like, I don't know anything. And I'm constantly searching for somebody to teach me. And the Delphic Oracle tells Socrates, well, that's why you're the wisest man, because you know that you do not know. Huh. In the Maniac, Chesterton talks about how actually man tries to get the heavens in his head and his head cracks. And if you find actually insane people, they end up actually thinking that they know the reason for everything that's going on around them. They fall into weird conspiracies and everything's plotting against them, and they can become trapped by their own internal logic. Whereas it's like the artist who actually doesn't need a reason for why that flower looks pretty, and I just want to pluck it off the ground and put it behind my ear and whistle while I walk. Is that because there doesn't have to be a reason except I just enjoy being alive right now, and it's how I'm expressing it. Anyway, the Maniac is a good chapter to read on this. So this is how God Himself is trying to respond actually by teaching them that they don't know. He is willing, and this is actually, the poet by an exquisite intuition has made God ironically accept a kind of controversial equality with his accusers. He is willing to regard it as if it were a fair intellectual duel. That's true. God comes down to the discourse in a certain sense, and He challenges them. He starts actually talking in similar language as them. Quote, gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and you answer me. Like this. Now, the everlasting God adopts an enormous and sardonic humility. Yeah, to actually condescend to enter into an intellectual duel with such ignorant mere humans, absolutely. He is quite willing to be prosecuted. Mark that word, prosecuted. He only asks for the right which every prosecuted person possesses. He asks to be allowed to cross-examine the witness for the prosecution. And yet, he carries yet further the correctness of the legal parallel. I find that absolutely amazing too, this legal parallel. Just so you know, and I don't think this was prevalent at his time in commentaries, but now that's actually one of the main structures that people look at the Book of Job, is that it's actually a court case. Chapter 13, like Job kind of makes it explicit that he's trying to file literally litigation against God in a court case. And he asks God, like, it's kind of like this whole thing, like if God actually appears in this court case, I will die. But that also will prove to me, that will prove my innocence, because he would no way listen to me unless like he wanted to vindicate me. So Job is willing to actually prove his innocence by willing to die in this court case. But he uses legal terminology. Chapters 28 to 31, contemporary now, like within the last 80 years, they found actual other examples of legal court cases, especially like from Egypt and other places in the Middle East, that actually frames exactly how Job lays it out in his concluding defense. He like remembers like past good things, then he reflects on current misery, and then he gives like this whole kind of like tabulation of actually how he hasn't broken certain laws and stuff, and how like, and he even puts a signature at the end of it, like, this is my court find of my innocence, may I be weighed in the balance. Like it's all legal. Like he takes God into a legal fictitious courtroom in a certain sense, and he files actually papers of his innocence, and he asks God actually to challenge. It's after that actually that God then shows up. So it's actually kind of the fact that he's using this legal parallel and prosecution, I think he was cutting edge. For the first question, essentially speaking, which he asks of God, is the question that any criminal accused by Job would be most entitled to ask. He asks Job who he is. And Job, being a man of candid intellect, takes a little time to consider and comes to the conclusion that he does not know. Who are you? Like, okay, now how does this happen? Just like, I don't want you to like just take Chesterton's word for it, but two pointed parts are like chapter 38 verses 1 and 2 is how this actually comes out. 38 1 and 2. See, when you read it, you tend to not know when to do the pauses. But look at. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? No one's owning up to it. God says that. Like, who is this who's darkening counsel by words without knowledge? The very next verse. Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Okay. Job doesn't speak at all through this whole thing. God asks a question, who? And like, we know who, okay? It's like, it's Job's mouth, but Job doesn't, he acknowledges in certain senses by being silent in it. 40. Now look at 40. And the Lord said to Job, this is 40 verse 1 through 5. And the Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further. The twice is actually like these lines right here. He talked a lot, he didn't answer. And he's laying his hand upon his mouth. It's my turn to listen. And then he goes twice, but I will proceed no further. I'm not going to go any farther. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, gird up your loins like a man, and I will question you, and you declare to me. But right there, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? Like Job, through the first half of Yahweh's discourse, has already learned like his place in the situation. I can't say anything here. And then lastly, 42 verses 1 through 6. This is the conclusion. Job's 7 lines, which is his perfection, if you will. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? That's like the first thing, huh? That God asked.
That's your.
Therefore, huh? Hey, I'm running late, man. It's like 11:40 here. Don't distract yourself.
Your face is gigantic.
Can I read now or what? Can I read?
Oh, your face is like as big as my whole body.
He was thirsty, big face.
I told you he was going to do this.
So you did.
How's it going, man? I
Yeah.
guess I'll stop.
Where are you?
Sure, Father. Take a seat.
I'm in my dumpy office.
This is your office?
Well, it's like not my office. It's the church's office.
It's like as big as my rectory.
Oh, this is inside of a 3-story abandoned school building.
Yeah, I remember that.
I like roller skated in and stuff. No, I don't, but I mean, I could.
Yeah. That's pretty late there, huh?
Yeah, sit down so I can finish.
No, I just came for the food.
Let's go to the back and eat so I can finish.
You're doing Joe?
I'm doing Chesterton.
Chesterton.
Chesterton's introduction.
Yeah.
Introduction to Joe.
Yeah.
When are you
Yeah.
going to do Exodus on my website?
Next week.
Did you just say next week?
Yeah, next week.
Yeah.
Jeremy, remind me.
All right, good. Well, thank you, Father.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me. Just so you guys know, I had to ask him permission. He said, absolutely. I want you to talk to my...
At 2 p.m. today.
Okay. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Job is acknowledging that to listen himself. Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Here I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes. It ends actually with this idea of the dust and ashes is also referring actually to the transitoriness of Job. Like he understands where he is in creation, and to the idea of challenging and actually wanting an answer for everything from Yahweh as actually the thing that actually he ends up. That it's in itself was actually darkening knowledge. Actually, that was actually losing sight actually of man's inability of actually knowing. Basically, Job comes to the conclusion that he doesn't need to know, and it's not his place to know everything, so he doesn't need an answer. And that absolutely, the of wisdom. So, the first great fact, okay, he's going to give 3 facts, and they all actually kind of go together, okay? I like this idea down here, where he talks about actually the salient point of God's speech, like the fact that he asks 61 questions. He doesn't give any positive knowledge in a certain sense. It represents all human skeptics routed by a higher skepticism. It is a method used sometimes by supreme and sometimes by mediocre minds. I like that. That has ever since been the logical weapon of the true mystic. And this is actually kind of a neat thing. Like, it's only somebody who's either really, really, really smart or really stupid who throws out a question. See, some people will like to pretend that they're smart by asking, like I don't know, like a rebellious teenager, you know, like, well, why do we need to do that? And then you give them a reason. They're like, but why that? Like they're not actually trying to seek knowledge. They're just trying to like actually cloud knowledge by asking questions. That is what he would call a mediocre mind. But a supreme mind knows actually what things to question because they never have a false sense of actual comprehensive knowledge. That's actually what we don't see very often nowadays, which is that some of the smartest people actually have a false security because they've forgotten they're men. They have a false security to actually how much they know. And so it's interesting. The same mechanism in a certain sense. Asking questions. If it's done in the proper way of actually illustrating the pursuit of truth and at the same time understanding actually the mystery, meaning like the limit of what our understanding can actually touch. It does it by asking questions of knowing where there is a question mark, where there is mystery. And somebody who's of a mediocre mind will actually question things that are firmly held by everybody else, in a certain sense of, in order to hide to their lack of knowledge, in a certain sense. I question everything because I, in fact, don't believe in anything. That's one way that I see it sometimes. Anyway, down towards the bottom, I think is actually kind of a brilliant thing. In dealing with the arrogant asserter of doubt, it is not the right method to tell him to stop doubting. It is rather the right method to tell him to go on doubting, to doubt a little more, to doubt every day newer and wilder things in the universe, until at last, by some strange enlightenment, he may begin to doubt himself. It's a beautiful actual way of presenting it. To tell you the truth, that could actually be almost a direct citation of St. Augustine. St. Augustine, in his book on choice and free will, actually uses the same argumentation in order to get somebody to actually believe actually that reality actually exists independent of, like, you can't ever actually think that you're imagining all of creation. You can doubt all of creation, doubt its existence, but at a certain point you're going to have to come to conclude that how someone has to be doubting. If I'm doubting everything, well, that means I am actually, in a certain sense. It sounds similar to actually Descartes' I think, therefore I am, but Augustine used doubting. If you doubt everything, you can come to the conclusion that reality actually does actually exist because you yourself actually are the one doubting. And so now you have to start looking outside yourself. So that's Chesterton's version of it. If you doubt everything, at a certain point, you're going to actually should be doubted. God comes in the end not to answer riddles, but to propound them. I like that. And the fact that God propounds riddles for Chesterton is actually compounds with a certain thing, which is actually, it's very satisfying. And that should be kind of surprising for us. Verbally speaking, the enigmas of Jehovah seem darker and more desolate than the enigmas of Job. Yet Job was comfortless before the speech and is comforted after it. He has been told nothing, but he feels the terrible and tingling atmosphere of something which is too good to be told. Like, yeah, like he does actually get the feeling of the majesty of God. Through God's questions, he understands actually like how absolutely supreme God is. So whatever God's hiding back, it must be something amazing. The refusal of God to explain his design is itself a burning hint of his design. And I actually like that idea. If you ever heard one of my homilies where I talk about how God is an amazing storyteller, which is why I can't stand when people say what's going to happen in the next chapter, because a good book is one that actually has surprises. That I think is actually what he's hitting in here. If we could actually lay out exactly everything that's going to happen towards like the dissolution of the world, it's a pretty boring book, because we could have written it, but God's a much better author than any human writer, which means there must be amazing twists and turns and surprises along the horizon. It's not going to be so simple as then all of a sudden, I don't know. The vaccine's the mark of the beast, and then whatever. You know, you hear people just like try to like posit what's going to happen in the future, and I don't like it. Which is why the Book of Revelation is such a mystery to me too. As sea monsters and creatures with 7 heads that come out of the ocean. I don't know why people try to explain all that stuff too literally. I don't know why people try to explain the future from the Book of Revelation too definitively. To me, it's written in such mythic language because of this thing. Like, God's hiding it from you, literally, in a certain sense, by packaging it in that kind of way. But this idea that, anyway, God's riddles are more satisfying than the solutions of man. That's right. Don't forget how big and powerful I am. I made this whole thing. And because of that, you know that I made it with a purpose in a certain sense, and also that you don't understand that purpose. But the fact that you don't understand it, that means it's a divine purpose that's even bigger than you could ever comprehend. That's what I'm trying to get at right there. Thirdly, then this third point, the mechanical optimist endeavors to justify the universe avowedly upon the ground that it is a rational and consecutive pattern. This is why actually I do not like intelligent design arguments in a certain sense. And this is actually Chesterton too, actually kind of like, yeah, I don't know. He points out that the fine thing about the world is that it can all be explained. That is the one point, if I may put it so, on which God in return is explicit to the point of violence. Like the whole idea is actually like God wants to understand that actually like the creation is absolutely mysterious, and this is something that you get in ethics at Elfland and in Orthodoxy, which is like, oh, so much of creation actually does boil down to a choice. Like why is it that chlorophyll reflects green? Like why couldn't it have been hot pink or fuchsia? Or black. Imagine if all the leaves were black or orange or something like that. Like the fact is that chlorophyll reflects green is a matter of choice, and the fact that it could have been any other color in a certain sense. It's almost a mystery why God ended up making it green. On its basic tenet, there's like science explains observed phenomena, but it doesn't actually explain like why the phenomena exist. Like everybody knows what gravity is. Sort of. Like we know the rate of like bodies are attracted to each other, but what the heck is gravity? Some kind of invisible force in which like we're pulled and pushed around? Like science actually never tells you the why. It does tell you kind of like the how of observed phenomena, but it never actually can get behind it, like why it is like that. And that's actually something that I think Chesterton's actually trying to actually restore in a certain sense. Like, there's a wonderment to creation. I once got into this big argument with my uncle because I was trying to tell him that I believed in Bigfoot. And he goes, hey, like, Dom, you're like one of the smartest people I know. How could you believe that we've been here in this world for all this time and we have all these game cameras and all this stuff, and we can't find a 9-foot gorilla creature walking in the woods? We've never seen it before. And I was like, and that's precisely why I like it. I was like, I like the idea that something can exist in this world and has observed our observation in a certain sense. And that thing is actually huge, like 9 feet tall, as a constant reminder of that we don't actually know everything that's in creation. I love that. And so you should actually propose it, and you should actually tell your grandkids, like, absolutely Bigfoot's in the woods. You know, they go to this like log cabin. I was like, absolutely Bigfoot's in the woods. Because you don't want them ever to think that they just know everything about what's in the woods. I don't. That's such a small world. I go in the woods all the time. And I like to wonder, what the heck was that sound I heard? I don't know. Maybe it was Bigfoot looking at me. Okay. Now, God will make Job see a startling universe if he can only do it by making Job see an idiotic universe. Now, this is fascinating right here. The idiotic universe. And he did read this part because he puts this in his litany, but this, I think, is probably one of the most hilarious parts from the book of Job. And I think this typifies the idiocy of the universe in a certain sense. And don't freak out by that term, okay? Like, but you can see how this is like, what about intelligent design? Well, yeah. If it's such a thing as intelligent design, why the heck do certain creatures exist? Like the ostrich, okay? Like Job, this is God speaking in his monologue about the ostrich. He goes, hey, Job, like, check out the ostrich, for a second. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly. Like, you know, ostriches have wings that actually don't work because they can't fly, okay? So they're like this big fat body with big long neck, and like it waves its wings proudly, even though those wings are kind of useless, okay? Because the thing can't fly. But are they the pinions and plumage of love? Yeah, they have these little worthless wings are they plumage of love? Because you know how hens use those wings. They like, they protect their children with them. Okay? Or the males use them in order to mate, to court. They show their bright feathers, if you will. But for she leaves her eggs to the earth. The ostrich just leaves his egg on the earth and lets them be warmed on the ground. She doesn't warm them with those wings. Like, her wings are actually too small. This like weird creature, the ostrich. Forgetting that a foot may crush them, she just leaves her dang egg right there in the dirt, and then she like runs away. Like, she forgets that like something can walk on that egg. Forgetting that a foot may crush them, and that a wild beast may trample them, she deals cruelly with her young, as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear. She leaves her egg in the dirt. She goes running around. That thing is completely vulnerable, and she's not scared that it's going to get crushed. Because God has made her forget wisdom, because she's dumb, okay? Like, that's basically, she's too stupid to be scared about her egg. She doesn't have any anxiety about that egg, because as soon as she's not looking at it, she's not even thinking about it. Because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and the rider because she can run away really quick, and left her egg back there in the dirt. Okay? That's the description of the ostrich, which is like, you read it and you're like, how in the world are there still ostriches around? Because there's a point to that. But somehow, this weird creature that acts so irrationally, as far as preservation of species, somehow they're still around. Like, God even provides for them somehow. How wise must God be to keep ostriches from going extinct? That's kind of like one of the whole kind of points there. So I call that actually the idiocy, if you will, of the universe, as described in the Book of Job, and it goes through certain things, but the ostrich and the crocodile are like two of the hilarious things. To startle man, God becomes for an instant a blasphemer, like what I just read. He's like we do say creation is beautiful, but look at the hard terms that God uses to describe some of the creation, like this ostrich. He's like, this ostrich is mean to its kids, and it's kind of dumb, and just runs away. Well, that's like the words. One might almost say that God becomes for an instant an atheist. Yeah, it's the most unintelligent thing ever. Like, how can you say there's even an intelligent design? Look at the ostrich. He unrolls before Job a long panorama of created things: the horse, the eagle, the raven, the wild ass, the peacock, the ostrich, the crocodile. He so describes each of them that it sounds like a monster walking in the sun. The whole is a sort of psalm, a rhapsody of the sense of wonder. The maker of all things is astonished at the things he himself has made. This, like, whoa, look at that one. I had a great idea with the ostrich. That was amazing. Who could have dreamed that thing up? Yeah, there you go. This we may call the third point. Job puts forward a note of interrogation. God answers with a note of exclamation. Instead of proving to Job that it is an explicable world, he insists that it is a much stranger world than Job ever thought it was. The salient point actually of the Divine Monologues at the end of the Book of Job is actually, it's creature-based. It goes through all of cosmology in a certain sense. It talks about meteorological, like the snow and the rain. And it talks about the sea, and it talks about the dry land. It talks about like weather phenomena. It goes to the animal kingdom. You get to like the ostrich, and it actually will end too with even mythical animals, with the behemoth and the leviathan. And I can't stand it when I read a commentary. It's like, oh yeah, it's a hippopotamus. Like, no. The whole idea is like actually like there's creatures that are unknown and mythical, like Bigfoot. Creation is just absolutely like amazing. We need the mythical creatures actually to remind us how amazing the things that we see every day are. Anyway, that's the big thing. Like it's a strange world. And then he goes into this artistic sense. In chapter 38, verse 7, when he challenges God, like, were you there? Like, when literally light first shone, okay? How does he put it? Like, there's that famous passage where Jehovah, with devastating sarcasm, yeah, because it's a rhetorical question, which he knows, like, no, I wasn't there, asked Job where he was when the foundations of the world were laid. And then, as if merely fixing a date, mentions the time when the sons of God shouted for joy. That's 38, verse 7. This idea of shouted for joy. Like, Chesterton actually hints on this. Like, the fact that the sons of God shouted for joy, that's an image of actually the angels rejoicing at the beginning of creation. Because the book of Job has a sort of like a creation account from God's perspective. And anyway, these angels shouting for joy. This image is actually picked up in Tolkien in his Silmarillion. But the Chesterton looks on that and he's like, there's an artistic little intuition that when creation was made, it was seen as such an amazing thing that they're like shouting for joy. Like that itself is a very indirect commentary on creation. See, we just think of it all in these mechanical terms, like Big Bang or whatnot, and the sun's getting bigger and it gives us heat, and and we think of it in terms of very sterile, like unromantic scientific terms: entropy, rules of thermodynamics, rules of gravity. It wasn't a clock at the beginning; it was a party. Shouted for joy. One cannot help feeling, even upon this meager information, because it's like shout for joy. Shout for joy. Meager information that they must have had something to shout about. Or again, when God, in speaking of snow and hail, in the mere catalog of the physical cosmos, he speaks of them as a treasury. Yeah, he stored the rain and the hail. See, very often people will read that and they'll think of it, the simplistic, scientific understanding of the ancient Israelites. They forget that they're actually reading poetry. And Chesterton doesn't forget that. He's like, the idea that the hail is stored in a treasury from which God will fling it out, which he has before, to kill Pharaoh's cows, and which he'll do again. But the fact that it's a treasury, a beautiful little kind of view, that he has a treasury. He speaks of them as a treasury that he has laid up against the day of battle, a hint of some huge Armageddon in which evil shall be at last overthrown. Okay, so that must be some kind of really, really important kind of hail that's going to be used. But this idea, the day of battle, hinting at this end of all of creation, actually, at some point. Not just created, but of evil, Armageddon. Nothing could be better, artistically speaking, than this optimism breaking through agnosticism, like fiery gold round the edges of a black cloud. And this is where you get actually a sort of positive thing. See, agnostic is one who thinks they don't know anything. I believe that there's a God. I don't know anything about him, though. Okay, that's like an agnostic view. That's not what Job is trying to teach. Job is trying to think that you don't know everything because you're a man, but you do know some things. Again, the book of Job teaches you that you know nothing, but it's also the same book that has the largest divine speech in it. You do learn something in it. You hear God in it. So it's not agnostic. How do you liken it? The fiery gold around the edges of a black cloud. There's a glimpse of actual positive knowledge. Fiery gold around this black cloud. Your own lack of understanding. Those who look superficially at the barbaric origin of the epic may find it fanciful to read so much artistic significance into its casual similes or accidental phrases. But I think it's actually one of the greatest pieces of art actually in the Old Testament, which is, I think, the artistic significance is probably the primary way one should actually read this thing. In the same way, this is towards the bottom of this paragraph, in the same way the book of Job must be credited with many subtle effects, which were in the author's soul without being perhaps in the author's mind. And I think it's the same thing with actually Chesterton. Artists have a way of actually kind of like intuiting things. They don't actually know how to like, they know how to, they intuit certain things. And they paint a picture trying to convey that intuition. They can't always articulate actually everything that they're intuiting. That's why we actually called, it's only with artistry that we use the term inspiration, right? You have a good artistic inspiration. This idea of actually like he's being inspired from above with some kind of like divine assistance to like put something forward. Anyway, Chesterton kind of, I personally think Chesterton himself is a similar type of artist, which is why he can piece these things together like this. I do want to put actually this whole idea of this fiery gold round edges of the black cloud. Like he is just using this here, okay? This idea of this like this image of God, this fiery gold around even our lack of knowledge, the limitation of our knowledge, the black cloud. Like he's just throwing this out there. Maybe it's stuck in his head, but like chapter 37, which is what initiates the divine speech. Just let me just, it's the picture of chapter 37 is one big dark storm cloud rolling in. At this also my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Listen to the thunder of his voice. That's God's voice. The rumbling that comes from his mouth. Under the whole heaven he let it go. His lightning to the corners of the earth. After it his voice roars. He thunders with a majestic voice. And he does not restrain the bolts of lightning when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Do you know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? Can you like him spread out the skies? And now men cannot look on the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and cleared them. Out of the north comes golden splendor. God is clothed with awesome majesty. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power and justice. The abundant righteousness he will not violate. Therefore men fear him. He does not regard any of those who are wise in their own conceit. Right before God speaks, actually, there's this big dark storm cloud and thunder coming. And it starts to give way at the end with like a bright light. And then God speaks out of the whirlwind. Like, it's really neat actually to see how Chesterton actually uses images from the Book of Job as he packages these kinds of things. Nothing could be better artistically speaking than this optimism breaking through agnosticism, like fiery gold around the edges of a black cloud. He's taking that image straight from the Book of Job, right before God himself starts to speak. Literally shatters agnosticism. God is a personal God in the Book of Job. He definitely exists. In conclusion, this idea of these, by far the most important remains even yet to be stated. I do not know, and I doubt whether even scholars know, if the Book of Job had any great effect, or had any effect upon the after development of Jewish thought. But if it did have any effect, it may have saved them from an enormous collapse and decay. Here in this book, the question is really asked, whether God invariably punishes vice with terrestrial punishment and rewards virtue with terrestrial prosperity. This is what you... Does God just like give good things to people who are good, or does he just punish bad people? That would have been the wrong answer, obviously. If the Jews had answered that question wrongly, they may have lost all their after influence in human history, because that's absolutely a falsifiable proposition, but also they themselves have always fallen on very rough times. So obviously you're not supposed to listen to them because they're obviously really, really, really bad, right? They went into exile twice, and then even the Romans actually absolutely subjected them. So obviously they were pretty bad. They might have sunk down even to the level of modern, well-educated society. For when once people have begun to believe that prosperity is the reward of virtue, their next calamity is obvious. If prosperity is regarded as the reward of virtue, it will be regarded as the symptom of virtue. Men will leave off the heavy task of making good men successful. They will adopt the easier task of making out successful men as good. Oh yeah, think of that. So basically, you find the most prosperous people, and then you reinterpret your morality, and like obviously that person's really good because look how prosperity he is. Instead of actually making virtuous men successful, you just find successful people and reinterpret what good is. That's what Bill Gates does. Good is Jeff Bezos. Like obviously, look at how successful they are. Wow, now you have a really, really weird morality. So, but that's not what the Book of Job teaches you. Book of Job teaches you is that horrible things happen to Job, and he's perfectly innocent and righteous, and yeah, and God doesn't care to tell you why he had to suffer. Job is not told that his misfortunes were due to his sins or a part of any plan for his improvement. It's not even told, hey, this is going to be good for you. Think about that for a second. But in the prologue, we see Job tormented, not because he was the worst of men. Now he goes back to the prologue, and this is the fascinating thing, because the prologue and the end of the story are two things that most people see are actually like written by a different hand. This shows you actually the brilliance of two different hands actually using it in a certain sense. If it is like that, okay, you don't even have to admit that. It's all the same hand. Fine, I really don't care. But the beginning of the book makes it clear, actually, like he was the best of the men. Tormented not because he was the worst of men, but because he was the best. It is a lesson of the whole work that man is most comforted by paradoxes. Here is the very darkest and strangest of the paradoxes, and it is by all human testimony the most reassuring. I need not suggest what a high and strange history awaited this paradox of the best man in the worst fortune. I need not say that in the freest and most philosophical sense, there is one Old Testament figure who is truly a type, or say what is prefigured in the wounds of Job. What he's saying there is actually, there's this huge, very reassuring paradox, which is actually sometimes the very best of us actually have to suffer. Those who are suffering actually sometimes know, I might be the best in the world, which is why I have to suffer. Right here, what he hints at actually is like the Book of Job is actually where you have to look forward to. In a certain sense, Job points the sign towards Christ. How does he put it? That high and strange history awaited this paradox of the best man in the worst fortune. That's the true riddle of the Book of Job. And that is actually how Christian fathers of the church, Gregory the Great, see Job as a Christ figure. He speaks as a Christ figure. And that's one of the most comforting aspects that it teaches, not only that man doesn't know everything, nor can know everything, nor should know everything, but also that, yeah, bad things definitely happen to good people. And sometimes it's precisely because they're good the thing is happening. Is that mysterious? Absolutely. That's actually one of the salient points of the Book of Job. Somehow there's wisdom in it, though it's going to take us a lifetime to find it, or in the case of Job, it would take actually a millennia before Christ shows up to show the wisdom that actually there's definitely wisdom in actually the innocent man suffering. That's it. I'm not going to ask for He's the master. He's the master. So, they're round trees. Go ahead and send me my next assignment. Let's see what I can do.
Father, I have one quick question.
Okay.
Is the man who was Thursday a book of Job?
I think it actually is. It was written the same year as this introduction, and I do think there was one commentator on the Man Who Was Thursday who actually uses the Book of Job as his model, and I think actually The Book of Job is a clear key to it, which is why, to tell you the truth, and that influenced my thought. I never finished that lecture series, but my first lecture series was that I don't like a part of the. I wasn't going to give a definitive answer on actually what The Man Who Was Thursday meant, because I think part of its thing is that it's an extremely elusive type of book. But yet you can't help but see actually the comedic kind of absurdity of Sunday during the big, huge pursuit towards the very end. And yet it seems very Joban when you actually reflect on it. But anyway, I definitely think that the Book of Job is a useful tool. Wait a minute. It's the understanding the Book of Job, according to Chesterton's insight, is a useful tool to understand the Man Who Was Thursday. Absolutely.
He ends this introduction in the same way as the final words of Sunday.
Is that really?
And Sunday asks.
It has to deal with the cup, drinking the cup or something, doesn't it?
You drink of the cup, like it's the same idea.
Yeah.
Cup which I drink.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something to it. Anything else?
I mean, the animals too.
Oh no, yeah.
Or,
Well,
Party at
it's
when you said that,
the party
a light bulb went off in my
at
head.
the end of The Man Who Was Thursday. Big party.
yeah, Genesis chapter 1. Yeah, they're partying. That's a good
Also,
point.
they shouted for joy at creation. It was a party, like you
I'm
said.
telling you, it was written the same year, so it's definitely in his head. Absolutely. Okay, folks.
Big party.
12:14.
When will we see you again, Father?
I don't know. It depends on next time Ann sends me messages at 11:30 p.m. saying, "Are you going to be talking tomorrow?" This is actually easier for me to do now that you guys got this whole thing set up. It's easier. Before, it's like when you ask me to try to help you setting things up, like that's when it gets like onersome for me a little bit. But now you got it all set up. You figured out, Kate. You got that figured out.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can easily do this again.
Yay, good.
I don't know. Yeah.
We'll have to start.
I find it fun. I like putting myself into coercive things that force me to read good things and to think. So, anyway, it's been a pleasure. I'm sorry that I just dominate the conversation, but that's kind of what I do. I suffer from that. I suffer from that priestly defect. But those of you who don't know me, I'd like to think that I'm friendly and nice. And I wish that I was there to have gotten to know you better. But unfortunately, I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And those of you that I did know from before, it's very good to see you and spend time with you. And I still think of you all very affectionately. Even you, Tom. Even you, Tom. And I brag about my old parish, St. Stephen's, because they were so inquisitive and liked to learn and have classes. I miss the good old days. So yeah, I look forward to having them again.
How do you like Fort Wayne?
How do you like for?
It's different. I like it. I feel like I've been farmed out to retirement, sort of, or something. I don't know.
Is it small?
Huh?
Is it smaller?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's smaller. It's about. I guess it's a little under half the size of St. Stephen's. I don't know what you guys are at now, though. It might be.
100.
Well, to put it short, my Sunday is done at 12 o'clock. That's after I pastorally visited with people. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
It's a different type of place, you know. Low maintenance. Everyone. I don't feel very needed, you know. It's like I got a lot to offer. Nobody like.
We miss you.
That's why I'm up at 12:20 on a Tuesday night, because you know what? Like, I have mass tomorrow at 6 p.m. So
What would you want to do next time around, Father?
I actually kind of want to read the Ethics of Elfland, or like a couple chapters out of Orthodoxy would be pretty awesome to do after this. Ethics of Elfland and the Maniac, something like that. Ethics of Elfland, I think, would be really pertinent.
You could do that last portion of The Man Who Was Thirsty, the one you were going to do.
Well, I know, but I'd want to do that after I read some of Orthodoxy. When's the last time you guys read Orthodoxy?
It's been a few years, probably about 3 years, I think.
But like, I wouldn't propose the whole book, but definitely like the Ethics of Elfland.
Yeah.
I think the Ethics of Elfland is a very salient thing to springboard to right after the introduction to the Book of Job. And then actually for, side work, if you wanted to, I would actually read the Divine Monologues from the Book of Job. Not in the class, but you guys at home should actually read those. Now that I completely kind of gave you a whole background. Most of the very difficult things from the Book of Job has to do with the friends arguing, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't ever get to the Divine Monologues in the Book of Job because they're at the very end, and you get confused really quickly on in the Book of Job. But that understanding that thing of wonderment, I think the Ethics of Elfland from Orthodoxy is like just right up that's just step 2. He just develops that idea so much more. And keeping wonderment in mind, I think that is a beautiful way of actually reading the Divine Monologues. The longest speaking part that God has in the Old Testament in mind. But you tell me, as long as I can get access to it online, okay? So I don't have my Chesterton collection anymore. I gave it away.
You gave it away.
Give it away.
Why?
You know what? I always tell people, that if you don't write it in your books, you're saving them for somebody else. And you know what? My Chesterton books were not written on, and so somebody else could take them. But look at these things. See this?
Yeah.
This is mine. Nobody understand these notes and stuff I have on here. So I'm saving this, and I'm actually, you know where I'm putting this? My Chesterton introduction. I'm putting them in my notes on the Book of Job, which are right here.
Oh. Wow.
Which likewise, look at that. That's all messed up.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're going right here at the very back of this packet. So it'll be in my bag of tricks the next time I teach that class, whenever that will be.
Oh, you print it out and then you make notes in the printed version?
Yeah, because I normally need way more space than the book provides. Such is me. Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, I'm glad to see this group going strong.
Father, what's your pseudonym?
I'm not going to tell you until I haven't invented it yet, because I haven't written anything.
Bigfoot?
What's that?
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. I'm telling you. Afterwards, you should see my uncle. He was like, okay. I believe, but not really. I was like, you can't do that. You gotta not really. You like the idea of Bigfoot. I was like, idea, real, like, come on, man. Like, anyway, think about it. There's lots of sightings in the Sierra Madre, so you guys are in it. You guys are in it there, California. There's all kinds of weird things in California. It's not just the people.
It is the people.
I feel like if only I had to live with Bigfoot, that'd be better. Yeah. All right, I gotta sign off.
All right. Thank you, Father.
God bless you.
See you.
God bless you all. God bless you all. It's been fun.
A blessing,
Bless
a
you,
blessing,
Father.
a prayer.
I can't do it. It'd be simulation. You can't do it. I can say I love you, Susan. How about that?
I love you.
I'm not the Pope. I can't like bless the world. I don't know how they do that. But anyway, I can't do it.
All right, and I did record this if you want this.
What?
This
What?
was recorded if you want it, or if you want to, whatever you want.
Oh, wow, that's scary. Okay. Well, Curtis got me all self-conscious that I got a big face or something. I didn't do that.
No.
Man.
That was kind of outrageous.